Hi, Big Cup, and hello. Welcome to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. The entire premise of this show is based on Rory getting into an extremely expensive private preparatory school and Lorelai needing to borrow money from her rich family to make it happen, so that she could get into another fancy school and continue that cycle of privilege and financial success. Money really is at the heart of so many plots and moments of this interpersonal drama on the show. So this week we wanted to take a deeper look at some of the financial dynamics that make the show turn on its axis.
This is your regular reminder that this is a spoilers all podcast. So if you don't want to know what happens, you may want to put on your earmuffs now. And if you could hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already, and drop us a comment, share this video with your fellow Gilmore Girl lovers, we would be eternally grateful.
We're going to waste no time jumping right into our recaps. And we're going to start off with episode 11 of season 2, Secrets and Loans. And Lorelai discovers that termites have destroyed the integrity of her foundation, and that it's going to cost $15,000 to repair her beloved house and make it safe. Rory pitches asking Emily and Richard for the money, but Lorelai refuses to be further indebted to them. She begs every bank in town for a loan, but none go for it, and Rory tells the grandparents anyway, causing a fight between her and Lorelai. Lane has joined a cheerleading squad, which also causes a rift between her and Rory. Eventually, Emily sets up a meeting at her bank, and after Lorelai is rejected on her own, Emily agrees to co-sign a loan. The only cost being that she will be hosting DAR lunches at the inn from now on.
Season 2, episode 12 is Richard in Stars Hollow. With Richard retired, his constant presence annoys Emily, so she suggests that he spend a day in Stars Hollow with Lorelai and Rory. He critiques Lorelai's eating habits and professionalism, and also won't let Rory accept the car that Dean built for her, which is now finished. Lorelai stands up to him and says that it's her house, her life, and the only thing that matters is her opinion when it comes to how she and Rory live. Two interesting financial moments, I think, happening in this. Obviously, Secrets and Loans being the dominant, obvious example. And even the fact that, like, Rory is gifted a handmade classic car by her boyfriend. Excuse me, you're 17. Get out of here. So I thought this would be a good episode for us to talk about some of the financial dynamics at play. I'm sure that this will come up in numerous other episodes, and we may have to have like a second episode devoted entirely to money. And we're also definitely going to be talking about economic class and classism in the show when we get to the party's over, when we talk about the male Yale party. So really excited for that one, because I have even more to say on the sort of like grander economic scale. This is more like personal finance and how money, or the lack of it, sort of plays into the plot elements, as opposed to like the attitudes of the uber rich kind of thing. So yeah, let's dive into some questions about the cheddar on the show.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to throw you with one of the most basic ones. Money. Good or bad?
Oh my God. I hate this question already. I understand its utility for exchange. I really do. But capitalism sucks. I'm a little over capitalism because, it's just, I don't know if we're meant to live under a system where we have to give away so much of our time and our labor to enrich others, as opposed to creating a meaningful, enriching life for ourselves. So it's a really complicated question. Like, I have a degree in political science with a little bit of like economics thrown in there. And even I, struggle to answer this question. And I'm certainly not like fully socialist or Marxist or any of those things, but I definitely hold some progressive views. And I definitely, I see the structural and systemic problems with, market fundamentalism really at times, and the inequality is just growing. So, money in itself is not inherently bad, but it's how a lot of people squirrel away wealth and don't use it to do anything productive in society, while laborers are, shall we say, peeing in bottles instead of having time to take bathroom breaks. Sure. I'm not talking about anyone in specific there. Nope. I'm sure that's a completely opaque reference for everyone.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, it gets to be really problematic when it is allowed to accumulate in the hands of the few to the detriment of the many, because I think, fundamentally humans deserve to have a good quality of life. There's more than enough resources on this planet. There's more than enough money on this planet for people to live comfortably and eat and, enjoy their lives and their leisure time. But it's just been made nearly impossible by the way that governments have allowed, the uber rich to create policy to further enrich themselves and take the money out of the hands of the people who need it most. What about you? What do you think? Money, good or bad?
Inherently, I actually think it's good. I think it's bad when the individual mishandles it or disproportionately appropriates their funds in a way that's egregious or self-centered, but it can do wonders for any given person and any social class when it's handled appropriately. And so I don't think money is inherently bad. I think it's how people handle it and the hands that we're putting that money into. So it's the individual that's the source of that corruption and that negativity, but not the actual dollar bill itself at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, dollar bills don't have much say in where they go or what they do. But what you bring up there touches on that sort of like neoliberal philosophy of individual spending habits and how we judge those in people, how we believe in this sort of bootstraps narrative of your success and your social mobility and your economic mobility are directly proportional to the value of the labor you produce and your sort of like your financial moral priorities being exactly right, So in a way, yes, there are certain individuals who wield too much power because of their money, but also we should be somewhat critical of assuming that most financial problems are created by individuals instead of systems. There are certainly individuals who perpetuate those terrible systems, but there's definitely a habit where we judge rich people and poor people differently based on like the exact same behavior. And it comes out of this sort of idea of, well, you wouldn't be poor if you spent your money right. And so, I see some of that aimed at this show as well, even with like, how can Lorelai afford to eat out all the time, And in a way, I get it. But, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about food on the show and diet culture. But Lorelai grew up in a house with a chef and then moved to an inn with a chef. So she probably never learned how to cook. And so not only that, but she's a busy working single mom, and she probably just did not have the time, the energy, or the know-how to cook for Rory. And so to like judge her eating out all the time just feels like a surface level, like, oh, well, you shouldn't be spending your money that way kind of situation. So I definitely want to be careful not to like malign the decisions of the working poor and say like, well, it's your fault that you have no money because you just make bad decisions, when a rich person could make the exact same decision, would be like, you go girl. So
Yeah. So I agree. I'll lead us here. Which characters on this show handle money appropriately? Who does not? Loaded question, because I feel like
does anybody handle money? Maybe Luke handles it the best. But, okay, here's the other thing that, the elephant in the room with Luke is that his ability to be an entrepreneur and to direct his own life and his own finances comes from the inheritance of property, and probably the inheritance of money and or other property. Like, I've heard people mention that obviously he inherits the diner when his father passes. But the other thing that I've never seen anyone mention is that they must have had a house growing up, like in Stars Hollow, 2-3 bedroom house, maybe more. We don't know. But given that Luke doesn't seem to control that house anymore, I'm guessing that once his parents were both gone and Liz had begged off to the city, he sold that property and gave her some of that money and kept the rest for himself, like paid them out from the sale of the property. And he used that money to further like retrofit the diner and put away some stuff in savings. And so he had an early leg up in life out of an unfortunate circumstance, obviously. But, when people say he's like working class entrepreneur, did it all by himself, he had opportunities that a lot of people don't get. And that certainly gave him a leg up. But, he's still not on the Gilmore level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But regardless of that, he makes a modest accommodation for himself in his dad's former office. He lives well within his means, saves most of his money, invests it, purchases more property, rents it out, becomes a landlord. So he's got social mobility from that as well. And, again, still not on the level of the Gilmores and not to a level that they even approve of, because the other Gilmores are snobby like that. But even, the landlord of it all aside, he still makes pretty good decisions with his money. And that allows him to, help Lorelai by investing in the inn and by investing in her property as well, so that they can live peacefully together in a more appropriate space. So I think Luke feels like the right answer.
What about Kirk?
Okay. You know what? That's a good example, actually, that I hadn't even thought of. He's clearly a hard worker. He's got a diverse set of skills. He saves money by living with his mother. He invests, and he comes away with a tidy sum that's enough to put a solid down payment on a mansion, a historic mansion. So good call.
I've only worked 257,000 jobs to acquire the wealth that I have. But yeah, I mean, for all of the odd jobs that Kirk has had, he's saved money and he was smart and responsible with it. And Luke faults him for, like, not even faults him for it, but just is astonished by it when he's like, how can you even afford the Twickham house? Like, what is going on here? But the man was obviously careful with his money and did well with it. So maybe Kirk.
I like that answer.
Weirdly, on top of everyone else on this show, just handled money the best, which is weird. But yeah.
It's a good one. Okay, who managed their money the worst?
I mean, Lorelai. Look, on top of managing money the worst, it's also just a plot point and a really egregious error to me. Like, that there's no way that Lorelai and Rory could have lived the way that they did even in the 2000s in Middle Clump, Connecticut, getting by the way that they did, with property taxes being what they are, with the cost of living being what it is, even at that point 20 years ago. And then just with how we see them conducting their day-to-days, with hitting up the diner every single morning, constantly eating out, shopping and splurging whenever they felt called to it. There's no way that Lorelai's salary, even with her position as manager of the inn, afforded them that. Yeah. And it's just not realistic. Like, she would have had to have been making, I would say, triple probably what her actual salary was to afford the lifestyle that we see them living. So that's not realistic. And I don't think she managed her money well for that, in that sense, especially because she can't even afford her kids' tuition when it comes down to it, which is mismanagement. And we've talked about that already in other episodes. But yeah, Lorelai did not manage money well, which is also surprising considering her upbringing, and that she was raised in a wealthy household with parents who were superfluous with their wealth, but managed it nonetheless.
They probably paid someone to manage it, realistically. Which, again, it can be one of those luxuries afforded only to those who have enough money to invest, to have someone help them with that, which, again, just further entrenches those inequalities, baby. But yeah, I don't know if it was mismanagement or naivety or something that actually occurred to me that I'd never really thought of before was that I wonder if Lorelai thought she would have more time to save up, and that the like, oh, it doesn't give me enough time to pull a bank job was just sort of like a funny way of saying like, I thought I wasn't going to have to pay this until like the start of next school year. I wonder if that might have been a factor, but she still should have known. Like, maybe it was just her being funny, but not seeming to know exactly how much the enrollment fee is and when it's due and how much is due up front feels like an oversight. And it's a writing decision, I think, that sounded funny at the time, but logically didn't hold up. Yeah.
Do you think she should have? Go on.
I was just going to like continue on the previous question in terms of like who was worse with money.
Go on.
I would also add Rory to that list. Adult Rory seems to have some trouble because she turns down stable jobs. She looks down on jobs that aren't in her field. She says, you know, I'm broke. I don't have any underwear. My license is expired. Like, excuse me? You had like 2 trust funds. Like, Daddy paid for Yale. Grandma and Grandpa paid for Chilton. They bought you your car that you seem to still be using. I think, is she still driving the RS in the revival? I can't remember. It might be a little too old to still be functional. But, you know, I wonder if, you know, the number of people who swooped in to provide her opportunities that most other people didn't get gave her a messed up idea of how much she could rely on that sometimes. And so I think Lorelai and Rory are maybe up there in, if not mismanagement, just like some messed up ideas about money and financial independence and, you know, the financial realities of living in this world.
I agree. That makes me think to another question I want to pose to you. We see a lot of financial control and manipulation within this show. I think that starts early on from Trix Gilmore, who is, I think, at the epitome of that with what we see. And that trickles down into Richard and Emily, and therefore how they treat Lorelai and Rory. And it's generationally passed down. But do you think is that something that on the whole, we as a society should be worried about? Like, is financial control and manipulation something that we need to consider a course correction on in terms of behavior? Should we be worried about that generationally? I can't talk. Generationally being passed down, like, or is that something that is just a one note?
That's an interesting and multi-layered question, because I think it is important for people to be aware of the red flags of financial manipulation and financial abuse. It's certainly something that is prevalent enough, but nobody really knows how to recognize it when it's happening until like later, when they're like, oh, I didn't recognize that like my parent or my significant other has a personality disorder and has been financially controlling me. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. More to your question, it does seem to be generationally passed down at sometimes, because for me, Emily is a really great example of this, because she clearly comes from wealth. You know, like for her was it her sweet 16 or her 21st birthday or something, she insisted on having invitations covered in pearls. Her first trip to Paris, she stayed at the Ritz. She went to Smith in the 60s. Like, she comes from money, right? And she married money, old money. And she like obviously has some serious emotional roadblocks that were probably caused by her parents' neglect of her. And because she comes from money, she probably experienced her parents using money to solve everything, or using money to just throw gifts at her to provide her with comfort instead of affection, right? And she tries to do the same thing to Lorelai. Money is very much her love language. Gifts, gift giving. generosity, or at least what she thinks is generosity, is very much her mode of showing that she cares, because the way that she was raised and the gender norms and the expectations put on her when she was young don't allow her more authentic emotional expression. She never learned how to do that. It was never modeled for her. And so she always defaults to the money thing because she has plenty of that, and she uses it to try to like act as a proxy for love. So I think that's where the conversation gets interesting about Emily and Lorelai and the financial control at play in their relationship, because I have seen some discourse online that refers to Emily as financially abusive to Lorelai.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, I can see some of that, but there are other facets of it that are sort of missing as well, in terms of like, usually financial abuse constitutes a more substantial control over someone's actions, like a spouse who convinces you not to work and then takes control of all of the money and all of it is theirs, and they won't let you leave them because then you would be financially destitute, right? That, or as a subdivision of that, if you're not working and you're given like a really pitiful allowance, or all of your spending decisions are scrutinized, even if something is necessary or useful, those kinds of things constitute like real financial control and abuse. In Emily and Lorelai's case, the only real strings attached are, hey, you have to spend time with us. You have to like make us a part of your life. So it's uncomfortable for Lorelai because she doesn't like it. And there's some trauma, I suppose, from her childhood that, you know, being back with the Gilmores, that the Gilmore house sort of brings up in her. But I wonder how much of that is actually her attitude toward wealth and moral superiority by choosing poverty instead, and how much of it is actually properly mistreatment against her. You know, her parents provided her with educational opportunities and commodities and travel and experiences that most people don't get. And yet she felt the need to escape a life of comfort and security, in pursuit of independence and autonomy. So other than in Dear Emily and Richard, we don't see a ton of it. Like we do see some instances throughout the show of some manipulative comments on Emily's part. Not so much Richard's, mostly Emily. She's the biggest culprit, I think, with that. Where, you know, she uses guilt or manipulation, or sometimes it's done comedically as well. Like in Richard's in Stars Hollow, it happens actually, where she's getting desperate because he's bugging her. And she's like, you know, I'm paying for children. I co-signed your loan. You still have your house because of me. You owe me. But it was more just like, please, I'm desperate. Like she didn't mean it. It just sort of like came out as like, hey, you owe me. It's so interesting and not clear cut, because there is some of it, but I don't know that it happens to the level that people claim it does. You definitely see it when you know what to look for. I've gone on a really long tangent about this. I'm like, okay, what was their actual question? Like, yeah, I think people need to be aware of the signs that it's happening to them. And I think Lorelai does at least recognize it, but she still maintains a lot of financial autonomy. She makes a lot of her own financial decisions. She is not entirely indebted to them for absolutely everything in her life. It's just these very like narrow parameters where there are some sacrifices to be made in terms of allowing her parents back into her life, spending time and spending emotional labor to repair that relationship. But financial abuse is real and it is subtle sometimes. And so like I do see it. And actually like maybe the show is a good way to show people how to spot it. That was a very long answer. I hope it was satisfactory.
More than satisfactory. I'm just sitting here learning a lot. But you made me think too, and this was not even something that I had considerably thought of until now, but I feel like there is a trickle down with how the mismanagement of money and how privilege can affect and factor into that. Because now I think of the instance of when Lorelai and Suki are trying to build their new inn and get that underway, and the construction is delayed because they don't have the money to float it. And so they have their lead, like the head of management and their construction worker coming to them saying like, listen, are you going to cut me a check anytime soon? Because I can't pay my workers and they're not going to continue to show up if I can't pay them. And Lorelai says like, please just give me like 2 or 3 weeks and I will get you something, you know, and he says, okay, like I'll do it for you. But even she and Suki went into this not knowing or understanding what the financial repercussions of this was going to be and what the cost of all of this manual labor was going to be. And now they're having workers on the clock that they can't pay. Do you think that this mismanagement of money and this financial naivety, where does it stem from? Where does it come from? Because I feel like Lorelai should have known better.
That's a really good question and an excellent example. Like, I think part of it was that the construction budget or estimate given to them by the contractor ended up being a lot more than they thought. And then they added on stuff like converting the old barn into a stable. And so that added to it. And, you know, Suki wanted the big expensive stove. And in a way, you know, you got to spend money to make money. I don't necessarily think that these were bad investments, but it's hard to say whether it came from Emily and Richard or whether it was just Lorelai's understanding of that fact of like, you know, if we put out the extra money now for the horses, we can upcharge and we can do all these other things. Or whether it was just her idea of what a luxury B&B or inn was like in Connecticut and what it took to compete in Connecticut at the time. It's hard to say, but I don't even know if that was just financial illiteracy or mismanagement because she has a business degree and an accountant. Like, I think it might have just been the fact that construction projects often balloon to be more than you think. There's always a hidden cost, or, you know, something takes longer and therefore you pay more in labor costs, or you decide to add one more thing because you might as well do it now. Like, what were they going to do? Leave that stable basically about to fall down with or without horses? Like, it was a good idea for them to convert that, right? So I don't know if it was mismanagement or whether it was just the desire for more.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Richard and Emily could have taught her better?
I don't know if they taught her. You know what? Now that you mention it, I don't know if they taught her anything. I think they taught her to marry rich and expect a comfortable life and nothing else, because she wouldn't necessarily be expected. Well, she would be expected to go to an Ivy League institution, but not necessarily have like a high-powered job. You know, they probably thought that like life would sort itself out for her as soon as she found a man. And so she probably had to teach herself and or learn it in business school, which she seems to not have approached until she was at least into her mid-20s. So then again, I don't think a lot of us are taught proper financial management from our parents or from our schools for that matter. So that's a really good point. I don't think they taught her a damn thing except how to fire maids and how to choose a centerpiece for the table and, you know, how much a Duncan Fife is worth.
Mm-hmm. That being said, if Lorelai didn't know anything about how to manage money, do you think Emily knew how to manage money any better? Because it seems like she married Richard, and I think we've agreed that for the most part, like the love was there within that marriage. Whether parents were there from the beginning orchestrating that or not. But she seems to have been content in that marriage. But my question here is, did Emily know how to successfully and appropriately manage money? Or do you think that there was too much power held on Richard's part with how money was managed and how assets were managed within that marriage? Did Emily ever really have any say in the income, considering that she was always a stay-at-home mother, or a wife who was not working and who relied on her husband for the income. Did Richard ever give her say in a way that was appropriate, or was she just trophy wifing it and just the marital assets were at her disposal, but not really in her control?
I think you hit the nail on the head. She absolutely did not have meaningful control over money. I think it's clear in I Am Kayak, Hear Me Roar, when Richard is, recovering from his heart attack and she's trying to do some tax forms, like not simple tax forms necessarily, because sometimes, corporate taxes can be all kinds of confusing. And this is why you get accountants when you have businesses. And Lorelai knows what she's doing and steps in to help. But like, she knows nothing about what even the name of the tax form. She's like, I don't know how to do any of this. Like, I just got married and Richard took care of all of this. And, and then you see in the revival when Richard passes how nothing was ever in her name. She was always Mrs. Richard Gilmore. And that house that she buys on Nantucket is the first thing or substantial thing that she buys in her own name. And so Richard does hold most of the financial control. That said, I don't know that he abused that power. I think they seemed pretty content in their dynamic. She never really lacked for anything or seemed to take any issue with how he was spending or investing the money. She didn't know about it all, but it's not like Richard seemed to be doing things that were super shady. He was investing in windmills and, buying Bob, I guess.
You're acquiring Bob.
It's a one-man company. Yeah.
Does he have to light his own candles and give himself his own cake?
Does he have to throw himself a going away party? That's a really funny episode. But yeah, the lawsuit from Floyd brings up some financial issues where Richard puts his pension up as collateral for their business. And, that's a risky financial decision that he didn't consult her on. He retired without consulting her, which lost them some money, some investments, some stock options. So he definitely controlled the money. But in the end, I don't think he ever denied her anything that she needed or wanted. I don't think he lorded it over her necessarily. I think he was a little condescending in his attitude toward it at times.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he used it to try to control her. I don't think he ever threatened to take it away or to do anything nefarious with it. I don't think he manipulated her with it. And even tricks, like she is judgmental of some of the financial decisions, but I don't know if she's like financially abusive herself. I think she's maybe more emotionally abusive and is like trying to get under their skin a little bit with it she doesn't have any control over it, but she wants to use it to sort of like take a dig and tell them what's appropriate and what's not, which is in itself not appropriate. So, yeah, it's interesting to see Emily take control financially in A Year in the Life and to experience independence. And well, she does experience independence, but it's because she inherited everything from her rich husband. Still steeped in financial privilege.
Yeah, also, just rip.
I miss you, Ed.
Yeah. I miss Edward. I miss Richard, but I miss Edward. And so obviously that plot point was written in because we lost that phenomenal actor and human being. But you make an excellent point. She gained all of that because she was just willed it, and that was what was left to her. And I think that speaks to a lot of familial privilege with money, which leads me to wanting to talk about Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
Because he is very immature and naive in so many ways that we can touch on. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to talk about how he's naive and immature with how he handles his own money. And he doesn't always have a lot of it. Early on, he's struggling. He can't even afford to buy Rory a dictionary when his card gets declined.
Granted, those dictionaries are like $400, so it wasn't a little pocket dictionary. Those things are like bricks.
Yeah, no, I get it, but still, I think the point that was trying to be made there was that this man does not have a lot of money, that he is financially not well off, as we see him early on. That changes as the seasons progress, and he gets himself into a career path and some jobs that allow him to be more well off. But once he is financially stable and even has excess cash and money to burn, he starts kind of flaunting it around and spending it frivolously and just throwing cash and just, in a very inappropriate, and just almost sort of like obnoxious sort of way. But I want to ask, like, what do you think about how Christopher views and handles money, whether he has it and when he doesn't, but more specifically, like when he comes into money, how he handles that money, and whether you think there's a mismanagement, if you think he approaches having that cash at his disposal well. How do you think he views it, and how do you think he handles the whole concept of money on the whole?
I think, especially in the early seasons, Christopher's whole thing is performative wealth. He wants people to think he's well off because that's how he grew up. That's how it's supposed to be. You don't want to be seen as poor or unsuccessful or like you're struggling at work, right? And so that's why you hear Richard talking about, like, oh, did you hear that his startup is going really well? Like, things are going very well for Christopher. And then you find out that that's not the case. And so you really see, and he's not the only one on the show who like performs class. So he definitely falls into that. And I think when he comes into that money from his grandfather, I think actually his initial reaction to it isn't all that bad because he's like, I'm gonna put away a huge chunk of this for Gigi. She can have preschool and prep school and, university, master's, graduate, wedding, house, or all the cats that she wants, she's set. And then his next initial thought is to take care of Rory and Lorelai in a way that he couldn't before. And I don't think that's a terrible thing. I think, he was just trying to do right by them. And, obviously Lorelai didn't take him up on his offer for a brewery or a castle, which I think was a huge mistake. Like, I want both of those things.
Same.
Lorelai, make better decisions. God. So it was nice that he wanted to step up like that. But once again, Rory is saved by the massive amounts of familial wealth and privilege that, like, she was already experiencing this. She had a $40,000 sex house at her grandparents'. And then when that became unbearable, daddy steps in and pays tuition. So, yikes.
A little bit.
And, and here she is with this mom who tried to teach her to be financially independent. She can hardly hold a job. And just, I don't know, people keep swooping in to save her. Welcome to plot convenience. But, another one that's sort of an interesting point that I want your take on is, like, what do you think of when he and Lorelai are married and he moves to Stars Hollow and he starts trying to like upgrade the house and he, donates a huge amount to the knit-a-thon. Like, what's your take on sort of his financial place within Lorelai's life and within Stars Hollow? Like, is he just totally out of touch?
Yes.
Take a second, think about it.
No. Yeah, no, okay. Cue on the Jeopardy theme and I'll think about it for the next 0.5 seconds. Yes. In the same way that we've talked about how Max Medina was never going to fit into Stars Hollow, Chris was never going to fit into Stars Hollow for different reasons, but in this case, he didn't understand who and what Stars Hollow is as a town and the town's personality and how the financial mindset and the social class and the financial class that most of those people fall into are in. But Christopher comes into those later seasons when he's with Lorelai again, having wealth that he didn't have before and flaunting it in a way that is very ostentatious to the people of Stars Hollow. And we see that in Knit People Knit when they're having this knit-a-thon to fund money to rectify a bridge that is in need of repair. And so these people are just all geared up with their lawn chairs and their snacks to knit for the next 12 to 14 hours or however long it's going to take to raise the money for it. And Christopher just swoops in and donates thousands of dollars to instantly fund this entire project. And we don't see the entire town's reaction, obviously, because we can't, but we see even Suki just being like, oh, wow, Chris, yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. And it's not that the gratitude wasn't there, because it was, but it was just such an ostentatious display of wealth in that moment that just shows like, this is not what this town is about. This is not what these people are about. They are about community and having to pitch in to support one another, knowing that no one is Miss Moneybags or, financially well off, but they're willing to come together to fund these things. And it's also that communal aspect of just allowing the townsfolk to get together and engage and socialize that is also just an equally wonderful part of what makes Stars Hollow what it is. And Chris is obviously unable to recognize the significance of any of that. Again, not even from a money perspective, but just from like, these people love getting together. Like, they love having that socialization and being able to spend time together in that way. So for you to come in and just negate all of that with a donation, which, and I think in his mind was really just, I'm doing a solid thing here and I'm helping the town and I'm helping this bridge. But you took away something that was so special to all of those people in that moment. And they're just like, oh, well, I guess we'll go home now. What else are we going to do? He didn't understand that aspect of Stars Hollow and what these events mean to those people. And he was just using money as a blanket band-aid to solve a problem, which he's not the only person in the show that is guilty of doing that. I think it's a habitual reoccurrence that we see with Richard, with Emily, and just with people who are well off. But it just goes to show that you can band-aid a situation with money, but you're failing to recognize also the significance behind what some of these fundraising events can mean and how it can communally bring people together. And I just hated that moment for Christopher with him failing to recognize, like, you just took away something and an entire day from these people where it's like, that's probably all they had to do that day. And they were so looking forward to it and so excited for it. And I just hate how money can band-aid a situation in that way and how they can fail to recognize almost the damage that it can do with how discouraging it can be when someone is also flaunting their wealth when so many others don't have it.
Yeah, that's certainly one take on it. And the problem that he was solving with that money wasn't the lack of funds for, what was it, the bridge again?
The bridge.
I don't know. What were they raising money for this time?
The bridge.
Yeah. And the problem he was trying to solve was actually social acceptance, which, again, performance of wealth, performance of class, using money to buy acceptance from those you want to impress. In this case, it was because he knows that they love Lorelai and he wants them to love and adopt him the same way they kind of do with her. But that's not something you can buy. You know, Lorelai ran away from Hartford to Stars Hollow because it wasn't pretentious or ostentatious. That's what she likes about it. She likes the, solid middle class, everyone's just doing their best kind of attitude of Stars Hollow, as opposed to, the oppressive wealth of her youth. Cry me a river, Lorelai. Jesus. But yeah. Okay. I want to shift us from the Gilmores and the Haydens
Okay.
to another juicy topic when it comes to money. Let's talk about the Huntsbergers. There's your money, and then there's our money. How do you feel about, like Shira and Mitchum and Logan, like, and their attitudes toward money and shows of wealth and prestige?
It's disgusting and I hate it. I don't, and that's where, like, I don't think Logan, as much as he tried to be independent from Mitchum, especially, he never really was, because he always fell back on the privilege and the money that his family was going to be able to provide him when things were not going his way. So I think the individuality that he was seeking stemmed from him not wanting to be like his father and not fall into that mindset, but he didn't necessarily want to curtail the privilege and the wealth that could be gained from Huntsberger being his last name. He just didn't want to be the same person. But that's also not, it doesn't sit right with me, because it's like, it's just telling me that you still love money, probably way more than you should. And you're falling back on your privilege more than you should. And even when he fights his father on it, from job standpoints, and him fighting his dad on what he wants him to do, Logan is still very much just wanting to be his own person, but still expecting, and I think relying on that social standing too much, where, oh, my last name is Huntsberger, my last name is Gilmore, like, don't they know who we are? Like, that mindset is always going to perpetuate, even if they want to try and maintain their individuality and have that be seen to the world. To answer your question, yeah, no, I don't think Logan ever broke that mold. I don't think he ever moved himself beyond it in the way that he thought that he was. And I think that there is too much generationally, I can't talk anymore.
Generational.
Yeah, I'm just not even going to say it. From generation to generation, I think there's just too much just reliance on that always being there for you. So I think, and even as much as Mitchum tried to push his son to be better and be successful on his own, I think he was also doing it knowing that this could just better the family name and lead to more financial success and wealth and privilege within the family. I don't know if he ever or if he ever wanted Logan to succeed for the sake of just seeing your son being successful. I think it was all just about how, at the end of the day, it's going to make him look and how it's going to make the family look. And just money and greed and finance fall back into that, because the more you have, the better we look. So no, I don't think that anything that the Huntsbergers were doing was correct or beneficial either. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's, I don't love, like you said, the don't you know who we are attitude, the, just how much cachet a name carries. Everybody's talking about Nepo babies right now. And, at some level, they've got a point. Logan's a major Nepo baby. Hell, Amy Sherman Palladino is a Nepo baby. She comes from Hollywood. She's not exactly a bootstrapper herself. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, so like, I definitely don't love their attitude. And like you said, the perpetuation of the family legacy being solely about the accumulation of wealth and prestige. On the other hand, I don't think all privilege is bad. And I don't think taking advantage of privileges that you have are bad as long as you're not doing terrible things with that privilege and as long as you recognize it. And I think Logan is one of the more self-aware characters that come from that upper class society who, much like Lorelai, you know, wants to forge his own path and he wants to be independent and be his own person. And that's sometimes what that level of wealth and expectation doesn't allow people to do. And that's what Lorelai was trying to escape. So it's totally relatable to us and to Lorelai that Logan would not want that life. And so I don't necessarily blame him for understanding that that safety net would always be there, or even wanting that safety net to always be there, because it's available to him. Like, what's he supposed to do? Just like let himself be homeless and destitute? No, he's not going to let himself get that far. Like, there are economic limits to some of these things. And I don't think it's inherently bad to take the opportunities that life has given you and make the most of them, as long as you're not, you know, being a total jerk along the way. And I think Logan tried to do some stuff to atone at times for how much of a jerk he was or how much of a jerk his friends were. So I think the elder Huntsbergers are pretty crappy. You know, like Shira's whole attitude, she married up and has adopted this lifestyle and this mentality for herself.
Too big gold digger.
Oh God. Everybody just go back and rewatch. We've got magic to do. You won't be disappointed. Yeah, so I don't love that. I do like that Mitchum, you know, was trying to get him to like actually accomplish something with his life. I don't think that was wrong of him, but you could be right about, you know, you're going to take over the family. This is for the family. You know, not everybody can do that or wants to do that, Mitchum. So maybe let your son make some of his own choices. But, you know, Logan's an interesting one. I think we'll have to talk about his connections to wealth and privilege more later. I heard about something online. I don't even remember how this came up in my search history, but there's this court case out of Texas where a guy was driving drunk, I think, or possibly even high. His name is Ethan Couch. You can look him up. And he killed 4 people and injured 9 more. And his lawyer's defense for him was to create a term called affluenza, which means that due to financial privilege and, you know, neglectful parents not teaching him anything, he was never raised with any like boundaries. He was always just sort of allowed to run wild and do whatever he wanted to do and never faced any consequences. And that negatively impacted his development and caused him to do something reckless and dangerous. And so this actually kind of worked, and he avoided prison time at the time. He was also, I believe, a minor. So this was in juvenile court, not adult. And so he was given 10 years of probation instead, and he still managed to break the terms of that probation. So it made me think of Logan and the Life and Death Brigade and that sort of like mommy and daddy will always step in to save you vibe, and how, like, what kind of impact that has on the developmental psychology of kids who never have to face criticism or boundaries or punishment, right? And you know, we've kind of touched on this with Rory a little bit, and we will definitely get more into it when we talk about the yacht incident. But so yeah, she falls into a little bit of that herself, not on the same level because she doesn't come from the like I can steal a yacht and get away with it kind of level of privilege the way Logan does. But I really want to dig into that more, and we're already kind of running long on this, so stay tuned for more on that, because like that brings me to the Life and Death Brigade. Like, what do we think of Robert and Colin and Finn and their flaunting of their wealth?
I want to blame them for it, but there's also a part of me that at the end of the day, I can't, because I just don't think they know any better. Because when you're raised that way and you're so privileged in that way, it is so hard to break that mold. I almost would fault Rory more for it because she wasn't raised that way and she falls back into it. So she should know better. But children who are brought up so entitled and so privileged in that way, I'm not excusing their behavior because it's still inherently wrong at the end of the day, but I can understand how it's harder for them to step back from that and see and recognize their own entitlement and see how their behavior is just so ostentatious to the people around them. So I don't, do I want them to course correct? Yes, absolutely. But I can't fault I can't fault the LDB like that, and people who are just brought up so privileged in that way for falling into that mindset because they haven't known anything better or anything different, and they haven't been taught anything better or anything different. And it's on their parents and the people that are like even teachers and educators to raise them differently and show them a different path. But when they're not taught anything different and they're not shown a different way of life and they're not even encouraged to see and consider what it's like to be middle or lower class and what people who live and are not as well off have to deal with in that way, they're not gonna know any different. So it's hard for me to judge them for it, as much as I think there should be some sort of judgment and criticism for the sake of wanting these individuals to do better in life for themselves and therefore for the people around them and for humankind. It's hard to fault them for it when they've never been taught anything different. But what do you?
And that's why I have a lot of sympathy for Logan, because, you know, he grew up in a situation very like Lorelai, and we're very sympathetic to Lorelai and her decision to leave that privilege behind. Logan does it a little bit later in life and under different circumstances, but he still has that sort of like same desire in his heart to determine his own path and to not always let, you know, his wealth and privilege save him from everything. I mean, his reaction to the business deal falling through was maybe like less than ideal in terms of how his privilege shaped him there. I don't know if he recognized exactly how lucky he was, because his, you know, even his dad was like, you know, if you were any other employee, I would have fired you by now. You're lucky that you're my son and that we're going to sort this out. But then immediately after that is when he's like, maybe this is not what I need or what I want. And maybe I need to do something that actually fulfills me and where I don't have so much of a safety net, which is fairly admirable. So he doesn't go as far as Lorelai did. But then again, you know, and again, we'll talk about this when we talk about class. Lorelai didn't leave as much of the safety net or the world of privilege behind as she thought. She liked to think that she did all of this on her own, but she had a lot of privileges in life that were subtler that she didn't recognize. And, you know, even just the idea of sending her child to prep school and an Ivy League is just absolutely steeped in privilege. And, you know, the fact that she climbed up from maid to executive manager of a fancy inn and put herself through community college, but then assumed that the Ivy League was the only option for her own daughter, just goes to that same mindset of privilege. And she just doesn't recognize, you know, the economic cycles that she's playing into when she decides to send Rory to Harvard and then Yale. She thinks that that's where Rory belongs, and doesn't take a minute to think about what that kind of environment will do to Rory and to her ideas of wealth and privilege. Because, oh boy, we need to talk about Chilton and Yale at some point. I was thinking, like, I have notes on it for this episode, but I think we're running a little too long to do that. I think that one actually probably deserves its own conversation, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to displays of wealth on college campuses, especially Ivy League campuses, as well as the student loan system and how Rory got away without, you know, being a part of the exploitative student loan system in America, and how that further entrenched her privilege. Like, not only did she get to go to an Ivy, but she also didn't have to pay back student loans to the government at a massive rate of interest, right? So I think that warrants its own conversation down the line too. I'll have to schedule that in somewhere. But yeah, so
yeah. I'll say, let's just wind down and close this out with this. Do you think that it is inherently wrong or appropriate? Like, maybe I'll phrase it as like wrong. Is Is it inherently wrong to pass judgment on the upper class for the wealth that they have, whether it is garnered from luck or privilege, however they acquire that wealth? Is it wrong to pass judgment on people who are wealthy for what they have in their possession?
That goes to the heart of so much on the show, because that's exactly what Lorelai does, even though she comes from it. I think in general, no, it's not inherently bad to be wealthy, and that we shouldn't judge people who are wealthy, because some people truly did earn that through hard work and legitimate means. I think we should definitely be way more critical when that money comes from exploitation or illegal means, obviously. And I think also, to a degree, how that money is being spent. Like, not naming any names, but when you just decide to fly to space for a couple minutes and come right back to the tune of millions of dollars while your employees are being prevented from forming labor unions, I think there's some ethical problems there. And I don't want to support that kind of wealth. But
I don't know who you're talking about.
again, just very, like nobody knows that person. It's just a very obscure reference. I'm sorry. But yeah, it goes to how it was obtained and how it was spent. Generational wealth is a sticky subject because, it can foster some of those situations where people get that stupid affluenza and they just come from generations of people who are totally out of touch with the reality of the lives of most people and what can be done about that, and most people who are like that have that conservative mindset where it's like, well, if you just go to school and get a degree and spend tens of $1,000s on student loans, you too can have what we have and be successful, without realizing that, like, a lot of your privilege probably prevents those people from having any of that to begin with, because it just totally pushes them out of contention for the stuff that you have to begin with. So, some self-awareness. The other thing that would be great would be more like progressive taxes, where like the uber wealthy are taxed way more, and that the tax burden on the poorest of the population is nearly eliminated, because they should be carrying more of the social burden. When you have that much money, I feel like you have a responsibility to people, because you probably got a lot of that money through exploitation. There were probably a lot of people in the US who are extremely rich. And when I say probably, I mean definitely, who are extremely rich because of generations of family wealth that comes from slavery and illegal things and just absolutely abhorrent activity that, I think maybe there's a bit of an obligation to sort of contribute to society when you have that much, because like if I had that much, I think I would do that. I don't want to try to be morally superior in that. It's just because I truly believe that like nobody needs that much money. Like you can't do anything with that much money except like blow and like buying 15 yachts, and nobody needs 15 yachts. So I think that
maybe just like 14. Like you can have 14 yachts, but not 15.
Yes, 15 is excessive, but 14 is totally normal.
14 is fine.
Yeah, I think we need to be better about wealth distribution and understanding that our wealth can be used for good as well as evil. And I would prefer to see people make good decisions with excessive wealth. And that's what I mean, excessive, If you're wealthy, like if you're a lawyer and you've worked for 20 years at running your own firm and you bust your butt and you're a millionaire, rock on. Like you have earned that money. You're probably still paying off law school, but you have earned that money, as opposed to, I don't know, a certain monarch.
He who must not be named.
The other one who must not be named. So, people who just come into it unwittingly and do nothing good with it, really. Maybe not nothing good from the monarchy, but like maybe not enough good. More bad than good.
Yeah, there
That's
are
a scary
there are affluent individuals who are very charitable, who constantly give back to their community, and bravo to those individuals. Like, they're doing it right. But I agree with your point. When you are loaded and you are just a millionaire or a billionaire in a way where you just have so much money to spend that you can never even get through if you tried to, but you're just keeping it and hoarding it for your own selfish gains,
hiding it in the Bahamas and Swiss
or
banks.
going, again, like you said, just going to space.
In a
You know,
highly sexually suggestive spacecraft.
you maybe do something a little bit better with that money, like feed people who are hungry and starving.
Yeah.
Because, famine is not a problem at all in the universe. So let's just correct that. But yeah, I think that's a good maybe way for us to end this episode, just saying, like, wealth and privilege exist. It's always going to exist. There's always going to be an upper class. There's always going to be a middle class. There's always going to be a lower class. At least in my lifetime, in your lifetime, I don't foresee that changing. I hope that in the coming generations, maybe there's a correction that can be made. But for the world that you and I live in, I don't see that immediately changing. I think that all that we can do is try and be better at it for our children and our grandchildren and for the generations to come, and just hope that they can be a little more prosperous and well off by a little less self-centeredness and a greater amount of compassion for people who don't have the same privilege that the rest of us do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. We definitely need to be more socially minded. We're a social species. No one is meant to have that much money. It's like market capitalism has gone too far. And like, you can still be wealthy and have everything your little heart desires, but it's not going to buy you happiness. And it's not going to buy you acceptance beyond a certain level. Like, I think we need to have more disdain for the uber rich and stop maybe glamorizing it so much. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I think this show does, is it really does paint the upper class as pretentious and undesirable. They try to paint them in a bad light, even when they're trying to make individual characters emotionally relatable or sympathetic. So we'll have to dig into that a little more, because I think there was some incomplete messaging or naive messaging, maybe. I definitely am really excited to talk about class. I still have so much more to say on finance and the economics of education and class attitudes and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, because we've got more of this coming.
Yes, we will have an entire episode down the line on class, and we'll touch more on privilege and wealth at that point. But I think that's going to close us out here for at least what we have to say with this episode. In the meantime, what have we got coming up next on the podcast?
Everybody grab your popcorn. Laura, get your boxing gloves. It's the Battle of the Boyfriends. Yeah, so we're going to do this as sort of like an unstructured debate style almost. It's going to be a two-parter. So next week is part 1, where we're going to be talking about Christopher and Jason for Lorelai, and we're going to be talking about Dean and Jess for Rory. So it's going to be like a knockout, and the winner from part 1 will go on to be debated against someone else in part 2. So yeah, it's going to be a contentious one, and I'm very excited for it. I have a lot of thoughts, and you know what, everybody in the fandom does. So we're excited to hear what you guys think too, because this is one of those things that doesn't really have a clear-cut answer from the looks of it, and I would like to put that to rest, and I want to see in the comments that I'm right.
Well, you won't see that. You will not see in the comments that you're right, because the comments are going to show that I am correct in my arguments for who I'm going to debate for. But I mean, come on, if you're in this fandom, like, the battle between Team Logan, Team Jess, Team Dean has always been there. Team Chris, Team Luke, Team Jason has always been there. We're going to fight it out come join us and just weigh in on what you think as well. And then just, at the end of the day, declare me the winner, because I will be. So.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think I do.
You have no idea what's coming to you.
We're gonna fight that out. Yeah, no, we're gonna fight that out. Battle of the Boyfriends is coming up next, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you want to go back and check out some of our older videos, please feel free to do so. We just did a wonderful interview with Emily Kuroda, who plays Mrs. Kim on the show. I can speak endlessly on how much of a gem that woman is as a human being. She is an amazing actress, a great human being, a cat lover, which just gained her so many bonus points for the both of us. But please go back and check out that interview. We were so delighted to have her come on and speak with us, and we feel like you will really enjoy getting to know her better in that way. So go back and check that out. But go back and look at all of our old videos if you're wanting more Gigi content in that time. Also, FanFest is coming in the fall. We're going to talk about this a lot in the coming months. We will be there in Algonquin, Maine in the fall. Come join us. We're so excited to meet anyone from the show who's going to be there. But we also, more importantly, want to meet more Gigi fans and engage with people in the fandom and just establish more friendships in that way. So if you're coming, reach out to us and let us know. We'd love to meet you. We're just excited for all of that and for what the coming months have to bring within the Gigi universe.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's going to do it for us. Yep. Just as always, like this video, subscribe to our channel. We appreciate all of that support, and come join us next week as we fight over the boyfriends.
Yeah, next week's not going to be so much dinner as like a feast. It's going to be like lions in the jungle fighting over the carcass. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bloodbath, you guys.
Gloves are coming out, but yeah.
It's not going to be a fancy Friday night dinner at the Gilmores. This is going to be like...
It's going to be like a Teresa
Animal
Gigi
Planet
table flip event.
It'll be so good. Come join us for that.
Yeah, come join us for that. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Thank you, as always, for being here with us for this week and for watching this video with us. And we will see you next Friday night for dinner.
Next Friday night for
a bloodbath.
Friday night's all right for fighting.
It is, indeed. Take care, you guys. Bye.
Bye.